It was a cold, relentless evening, the kind where the wind bites at your skin, and the sky hangs heavy with an oppressive grey. The puppy's small body trembled beneath the weight of his suffering, his tiny frame shivering from more than just the chill in the air. Every rag breath he took was a reminder of the pain that haunted him. His fur, once a golden brown, now lay matted and stained with dirt, clinging to his thin body like a shadow of his former self. He sat by the curb, hidden from view by the rusting trash cans, hoping the world would simply forget he existed, and for the most part it did. People passed by without a second glance, too absorbed in their own lives to notice the broken creature silently begging for help. His eyes, wide and pleading, searched the faces of those who walked past. They were indifferent, moving swiftly, their hearts too hardened to feel the ache in his bones. The streets were no place for a puppy like him. He was just another forgotten soul in a world that didn't care. And yet, in the deep ache of his solitude, something shifted. She saw him. She couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the way he huddled against the cold, his small form so vulnerable under the streetlights. Or maybe it was the way his eyes locked with hers, a silent plea that shattered the walls she had built around her heart. For a moment, time slowed. The world around her blurred, and she stepped closer, her heart pounding as she knelt beside him. The puppy didn't move. He barely had the strength to look up at her anymore. But she could see the desperate longing in his eyes. She knew this moment was the beginning of something. The beginning of a rescue, not just for him, but for her as well. There was no grand gesture, no heroic moment of triumph. Instead, it was a quiet decision. She reached out slowly, as though she were afraid that any sudden movement might scare him away. He flinched when her fingers brushed against his fur, but he didn't retreat. He simply waited, exhausted. She could feel the weight of his pain, his fear, and it was unbearable. Her hand trembled as she gently scooped him up, cradling his fragile body against her chest. The walk back to her car felt like an eternity. She had no idea how long the puppy had been out here, alone in the cold. But she knew this. He wasn't going to last much longer. The muffled sound of her footsteps was all that could be heard in the quiet of the night. She didn't speak to him. There were no words. Instead, she whispered a silent promise as the car door clicked shut. "I will take care of you. I will make it stop." The drive to the vet's office was a blur of flashing streetlights and the faint hum of tires on pavement. Her mind raced. But there was one thought that kept repeating itself like a mantra. Please don't let him die. When they arrived, she rushed into the clinic, her breath sharp in the cold air, heart hammering. The vet met them with calm professionalism, but his eyes widened when he saw the state of the puppy. He didn't say anything, but she could see the urgency in his movements. He took the puppy into his arms, and for the first time, she let herself breathe. In the sterile, quiet room, time stood still as the vet worked. She stayed by his side, her hands gripping the edge of the counter, praying silently. Every now and then the puppy whimpered, a soft sound that made her stomach twist. But then, after what seemed like hours, the vet finally turned to her, his face softening. "He's a fighter," the vet said. "We'll do what we can. He's going to need a lot of care, but he has a chance." The words felt like a lifeline thrown in her direction. She wasn't sure how she could help, but she knew she would. For him. For both of them. Days passed, each one slower than the last, but the puppy began to show signs of life. His wounds healed, his fur began to regain its softness, and the weight that had hung over him seemed to lift just a little. She named him Charlie, simple, familiar, a name that felt like a promise. At night, he would curl up beside her on the couch, his tiny body seeking warmth, seeking comfort. And she, in turn, would hold him close, feeling his steady heartbeat beneath her hand. There was an unspoken understanding between them. She didn't ask for anything in return, but in those moments of quiet, Charlie gave her something she hadn't realized she needed. Peace. Every morning she would take him for walks. He was still unsteady on his paws, but his steps were growing stronger. He sniffed at the world with cautious curiosity, his nose brushing against the grass, the air. And though the healing process was slow, it was progress. There were moments when Charlie would look up at her with those same pleading eyes, but now they held something else, trust. And that, she knew, was worth everything. She had never expected this. Never thought that one decision could change everything. But as the days passed, she realized how much she had changed too. Her heart had softened, opened up to something beyond the walls she had spent years building. With Charlie by her side, she began to see the world differently. She began to see herself differently. But healing is never linear. Just as Charlie's body began to recover, the shadows from his past began to surface. There were nights when he would wake up trembling, his eyes wide and fearful, as though haunted by something only he could see. She would hold him tightly, whispering calming words as he burrowed into her arms, but she knew something deeper was at play. One evening, after a particularly difficult night, she sat with Charlie in her lap, feeling the weight of his pain. It wasn't just the physical scars he carried. It was the emotional ones too. The world had been cruel to him, and that cruelty had left marks that no amount of love could erase overnight. The struggle wasn't just his, it was hers too. She had come to love this puppy, to depend on him in ways she hadn't expected. But she feared that she might not be enough. What if the scars were too deep? What if, despite everything, he couldn't heal? But then she remembered something the vet had said. He's a fighter. In that moment, she realized that they were both fighting. She was fighting to give him the life he deserved, and he was fighting to trust, to survive, to thrive. Months passed, and Charlie became more than just a puppy. He was her family. The once broken creature had blossomed into a vibrant, happy dog. His fur gleamed in the sunlight, his eyes sparkled with joy, and his tail wagged with a fierce excitement whenever she entered the room. He had found his way back to life, and so had she. On a warm spring afternoon, they walked through the park together, the sun filtering through the trees, casting playful shadows on the ground. Charlie bounded ahead, his energy uncontainable, and she couldn't help but laugh. The joy that filled her heart was something she never expected to find. Charlie wasn't just a puppy anymore. He was a symbol of resilience, of love, of second chances. And as they stood there under the wide, open sky, she realized that sometimes the greatest gifts come from the most unexpected places. And in that moment, as she watched Charlie race ahead, barking with happiness, she knew that they had both found home. It was a quiet Sunday when the weight of how far they'd come settled in. Charlie had become more than just a pet. He had become her constant, her heart beating alongside his. There were days when the world seemed a little too overwhelming, when work and life felt too heavy. But when she walked through the door and saw him waiting, his eyes shining with an unspoken promise, everything else faded away. His presence brought a comfort that nothing else could match. He would curl up next to her on the couch, his warm, soft body pressing against hers, his head resting in her lap. She'd absent-mindedly run her fingers through his fur, the silence between them speaking louder than words ever could. In those moments, she felt a deep connection, an understanding that went beyond the surface. He wasn't just a puppy she had saved, he was her heart, wrapped in fur, her reason for hope, her reminder that love, no matter how broken, always finds its way home. Charlie had learned to trust, to love, but so had she. She learned to let go of the walls she had built, to trust again in a world that had once seemed cold and unforgiving. And it wasn't easy. There were still nights when he woke up in a panic, his legs shaking as if trapped in a nightmare. But with every comforting word, every gentle touch, he grew stronger, and so did she. One evening, as they walked together through the park, Charlie suddenly stopped in his tracks. His nose twitched, his ears perked up, and for the first time in months, he was alert, his head turning to catch something in the distance. She followed his gaze, her heart skipping a beat. In the distance, a small group of puppies played in the yard, their tails wagging in innocent joy. She watched as Charlie's eyes softened. He seemed to recognize something in them, a piece of himself, perhaps. She couldn't help but smile, feeling a warm wave of emotion rush through her. Charlie had come so far, from the broken, scared puppy who had been abandoned on the streets to this moment. He had found his peace. They stood there for a while, Charlie observing the other puppies, and she realized just how much he had healed, how much they had both healed. The days of suffering and silence had transformed into a story of resilience, and she knew that their bond would only grow stronger from here. As they walked back home, the evening sky painted in soft hues of orange and pink, she felt the familiar peace that had settled into her heart. They had both been through so much, and yet they had found their way back to each other. Time had a way of passing quietly when everything felt right. Charlie was no longer the fragile creature she had taken in all those months ago. He had grown into a strong, confident dog, full of life and mischief. He greeted her every morning with a wagging tail, his excitement infectious. He had found his place in the world, and so had she. But it wasn't just the physical transformation that struck her most. It was the emotional one. The fear, the sorrow, the uncertainty. Charlie had left all of that behind, and so had she. There was no room for past pain in their world anymore. Together, they had built something new, something unbreakable. Their mornings were filled with walks in the park, their afternoons spent lounging in the sun. Charlie loved to chase after squirrels, his little legs carrying him faster than she ever imagined he could run. And every evening, as the sun set and the world grew quieter, they would curl up together on the couch, the silence between them filled with a deep, abiding love. One night, as she sat on the couch, Charlie by her side, she couldn't help but reflect on everything they had been through. The cold streets, the suffering, the uncertainty, it all felt so far away now. She had rescued him, yes, but in doing so, he had rescued her in ways she never expected. He had shown her what it meant to trust again, to heal, and to love without hesitation. The world outside might have been filled with noise, with chaos, but in this small, quiet home, it was just the two of them, and it was perfect. As she looked down at him, his head resting on her lap, she realized that this was what home felt like. It wasn't a place or a building. It was this bond, this love. It was Charlie, forever by her side. In the quiet, the world outside faded away. It was just the two of them, and that was enough. The days began to stretch into a rhythm, a beautiful, comforting routine. But as time passed, a quiet unease started to settle in her heart. Life was fragile, and although Charlie had found his strength, she knew all too well how quickly everything could change. She had seen it in the eyes of the puppy she had found, the one who had once sat in silence, broken and alone. And in her quiet moments, when she wasn't looking, she'd feel a flicker of that same uncertainty. One evening, she watched as Charlie chased a butterfly through the yard, his body light and carefree as he leapt into the air, his eyes focused only on the fluttering wings. She smiled, watching him with love in her heart, but there was something behind her smile, an undercurrent of fear. She was terrified of losing him. He had become her anchor in a world that often felt unpredictable. And she knew that no matter how much love she poured into him, she couldn't protect him from the inevitable. But in that moment, watching Charlie bound through the grass, she made a silent vow to herself and to him. She would treasure every moment. There would be no more fear, no more second-guessing. She would live in the present, and with him by her side, and whatever the future brought, they would face it together. As if sensing the weight of her thoughts, Charlie paused mid-chase, turning to look at her. Their eyes locked, and for a brief moment, everything else faded away. In that quiet connection, she found something deeper than fear. She found peace. Charlie had taught her that nothing in life was guaranteed. But the love they shared, the moments of joy, and the deep bond between them, they were real. And in that truth, she found strength. As Charlie grew older, his playful energy slowly began to fade. His movements became slower, and he spent more time by her side, resting his head on her lap as they watched the world go by. His fur had grown thinner with age, the once shiny coat now duller, the edges of his ears slightly more ragged. But none of it mattered. He was still the puppy she had rescued, still the dog who had become her heart. One rainy afternoon, she noticed that Charlie was lying in his favorite spot, his eyes soft but distant. He didn't jump up when she called him, and for the first time, she felt the weight of what was happening. Her heart clenched in her chest, a wave of sadness flooding over her. She could feel it in the way his breathing had slowed, in the way his once bright eyes now carried a quiet exhaustion. She knelt beside him, her fingers brushing his fur, and she whispered, "I love you, Charlie. You've given me everything." He blinked slowly, his eyes filled with the same deep, unwavering trust that had first drawn her to him. And for a moment, she saw the same golden-eyed puppy she had taken in months ago. He was still that fragile creature, still the one who needed her, but now, he was the one who had shown her how to love without fear. It was time to let him go, she knew that. She had known it for a while, but somehow she had refused to face it. She had been selfish, wanting to keep him by her side forever. But love wasn't selfish. Love meant letting go when the time came, even if it broke her heart. She held him close one last time, her tears falling freely onto his fur. She whispered to him, her voice thick with emotion, "You'll always be my puppy. Always." The vet's office was quiet, the soft hum of the fluorescent lights overhead the only sound. The room was warm, and she held Charlie in her arms, cradling him against her chest as she had so many times before. He seemed at peace, his breathing slow and steady, but there was a quiet weight in his eyes. It was the same look he had given her when she had first found him, tired yet trusting. The vet came in, his expression kind but solemn. He had seen this before, the final moments that no one ever truly wants to face. He didn't need to say much. They both knew what was happening. She held Charlie until the end, her tears mingling with his fur as she whispered, "I love you, Charlie. You gave me everything." And then, in the stillness of that room, she felt him go. His body relaxed in her arms, and for the briefest moment, the world seemed to stop. She held him a little longer, wishing she could hold on to him forever, wishing she could make time stand still. But time doesn't wait for anyone. And just like that, Charlie was gone. The silence in the room was deafening, the absence of his presence overwhelming. She stayed there for a while, holding him, feeling the weight of their years together. There was a deep emptiness, a hollow space in her chest that could never be filled. But even in that emptiness there was love, a love so strong, so pure, that it transcended the pain. The days after Charlie's passing were heavy, thick with a silence that seemed to echo through every corner of her home. The once joyful energy he brought was now just a memory, lingering in the spaces he had filled with his playful barks and soft whimpers. She found herself walking into rooms expecting him to be there, his soft body curled up in his favorite spot, eyes watching her with the same adoring gaze. But those moments were no more. Instead, there was only the stillness, the emptiness of a home that had once been alive with his presence. The bed felt too big, the house too quiet. The places where he used to sleep were now cold and untouched. It was as if the absence of his warmth had left everything else lacking. She spent days sifting through old photos and videos, reliving every moment. She saw his first days with her, the timid steps, the fragile puppy who had needed so much. And then she saw his transformation, the dog who had grown strong, playful, and full of life. The bond they had shared was not just one of companionship. It was one of profound healing. But now, without him, there was a hole in her life that felt impossible to fill. It was a pain she had never known before, the pain of losing something that had become a part of her soul. She could almost hear him in the quiet, his paw pads softly tapping against the floor, his breath rising and falling beside her as they watched the sunset together. And yet, even through the sorrow, she could still feel him. It was in the way the sunlight filtered through the window, casting a soft golden glow on the room, just like the way he had always curled up in the sun to nap. It was in the breeze that swept through the trees outside, like a whispered memory of all the walks they had shared. His love had left an imprint on her heart, one that would never fade, and she knew that, while his physical presence was gone, the love they shared would remain forever. She would carry him with her always, in the quiet moments and in the ones that made her laugh. Charlie had been more than just a puppy. He had been a part of her story, a chapter that she would cherish forever. As time passed, the weight of Charlie's loss became easier to carry. The grief, while never fully gone, became a part of her. It was like a scar, a mark that reminded her of something beautiful, something precious. And in that scar there was healing. She had learned so much from him. His journey had not been easy, but in the end, he had shown her what it meant to love fully, without hesitation, without fear. One day, as she sat on the porch, watching the sky stretch from dusk to night, she realized that Charlie's impact on her life had rippled outward. She had started volunteering at a local animal shelter, drawn to the faces of the dogs who had not yet found their forever homes. There was something about those eyes, the same ones Charlie had once had, that made her feel connected to them in a way she hadn't expected. They were waiting for love, just like he had been. It wasn't about replacing him. No one could ever take Charlie's place. But in giving love to those who needed it, she felt as though she was honoring him, keeping his spirit alive in the world. And, in a way, she had found healing not only in her own heart, but in the hearts of the animals she now cared for. She spent hours at the shelter, playing with the dogs, giving them the love and care they deserved. She saw Charlie in every one of them. The same desperate longing, the same quiet fear, the same hope for a second chance. It was as though she was giving back the love he had once given her, and in doing so, she was healing the world in small, meaningful ways. She knew she couldn't bring Charlie back, but she could ensure that his legacy lived on. And every time she looked into the eyes of another dog, every time she felt the joy of helping them find their way home, she felt that connection with him again. It was as if Charlie had never truly left. He had just opened a new door for her, a new purpose to fulfill. Months turned into years, and life continued on, still marked by the love she had shared with Charlie. She still missed him. There were days when the grief would wash over her again, as fresh as it had been the moment she had said goodbye. But the pain was now tempered with gratitude, with a sense of peace that only time could bring. One summer evening, as she walked through the park, she stopped at the spot where Charlie had chased the butterflies so many months ago. The air was warm, the sky painted in soft hues of pink and orange. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves above, and the sound of children laughing filled the air. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to feel everything. The stillness, the joy, the bittersweet ache that had become part of her. And then, in the distance, she saw a small, scruffy puppy with big, selfful eyes, sitting alone by a bench. The world seemed to slow down as she looked at him, her heart skipping a beat. She knew this moment, this feeling. It was the same one she had felt when she first saw Charlie, abandoned and alone. Without thinking, she walked over to him, kneeling beside him just as she had done all those months ago. He looked up at her, his eyes wide with uncertainty, but she could see the hope in them too. The same hope that Charlie had once carried. And in that moment, she understood. The love she had given to Charlie wasn't just a chapter in her life. It was a story that would continue to unfold, as long as there were creatures in the world who needed love. She wasn't just saving animals, she was honoring the journey of her own heart, the journey that had begun with a small puppy who had taught her the true meaning of love. Years passed, but the lesson Charlie had taught her never truly faded. It lived in the way she saw the world now, in the moments she shared with the animals she rescued, in the kindness she gave to strangers, and in the peace she found in the quiet of her own heart. The ache of losing him had softened, yet it was a part of her that she knew would always remain. It had shaped her into someone new, someone more aware of the fragility of life and the depth of love. The little puppy she had found in the park, whose eyes mirrored the fear and uncertainty Charlie once held, became her new companion. She named him Leo, a tribute to the strength and courage she saw in him. Leo was a bundle of energy, just as Charlie had been in his younger days, and though he could never replace the hole left in her heart, he filled the spaces in between with joy, laughter, and love. She often caught herself comparing Leo's antics to Charlie's, noting how different they were, yet how similar their spirits were. Charlie had been cautious, hesitant to trust. Leo, on the other hand, was full of curiosity, bounding through life with a carefree spirit. It was as though he was a reminder that life, even after loss, could continue to be filled with wonder and joy. In the quiet moments, when she was alone with Leo, she would look back on the journey she had been on. The pain of losing Charlie was no longer something she feared. Instead, it had become a part of her, a piece of her that had helped her grow. She had found a new purpose in caring for animals, in rescuing them from the same fate that had once befallen Charlie. And in doing so, she had discovered something beautiful, that healing doesn't always come in grand moments of closure. Sometimes, it comes in the quiet moments between breaths, in the subtle shifts of the heart, and in the bonds we form with those who need us most. Charlie's presence remained woven into the fabric of her life. It wasn't in the grand gestures, but in the small, everyday reminders. The way Leo would sit quietly by her side when she was feeling down, as if understanding the weight of her emotions without a word being spoken. It was in the photographs on her wall in the old, tattered blanket that once lay on Charlie's bed, still sitting by the door. But it wasn't just about keeping memories alive. It was about embracing the gift that those memories brought. Every memory of Charlie, every laugh, every moment of joy, had shaped her in ways she hadn't fully realized at the time. She had learned to love deeply, to give unconditionally, and to accept the beauty of life as it unfolded, even when it was painful. One afternoon, she decided to visit the animal shelter where she had volunteered for so long. The familiar faces of the staff greeted her warmly, but it was the eyes of the dogs that caught her attention. Each one, waiting for their forever home, seemed to hold a story of longing, of hope, and of the desire for love. She found herself drawn to a small, older dog with a kind face, sitting quietly in the corner. He didn't bark or wag his tail, but his eyes spoke volumes. They were the eyes of a soul who had been waiting for someone to believe in him, someone to give him a chance. She knelt down beside him, feeling the familiar pull in her heart, the same pull she had felt when she first saw Charlie. It was a call to action, a reminder that love never truly ends. It only transforms. And in that moment, she realized something profound. She didn't have to let go of Charlie's memory in order to move forward. His love was a part of her, just as much as the love she now shared with Leo, just as much as the love she was about to offer this new dog. Love is cyclical. It expands, it stretches, and it finds new ways to manifest itself. And even in the face of loss, love never truly fades. It only grows. The adoption of the little dog, whom she named Max, marked a new chapter in her life. It was as if, with each step, she was growing into the person Charlie had always seen in her. The person capable of giving love endlessly, capable of healing, capable of giving second chances. Max fit seamlessly into her home just as Charlie had. Though he was older, he was filled with wisdom and grace, just waiting for someone to offer him the kind of love he had always longed for. The days grew warmer, and life continued with its usual rhythm. Leo grew into his role as the playful, loving companion to Max, and together, the three of them made a family. A family that had been created through the power of love, loss, and healing. It was imperfect, messy, and beautiful, and that was enough. One evening, as she sat on the porch with her two dogs by her side, she watched the sunset, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face. The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, and the gentle breeze whispered through the trees. It was in these quiet moments that she felt Charlie's presence the most. Not in the grief, but in the peace that had come after it. Charlie had taught her that life was fragile, but love was eternal. He had taught her that healing is not just about letting go, it's about allowing love to expand and fill the spaces left behind. And now, as she sat there with Leo and Max, she knew that Charlie's love had never left her. It had simply transformed, continuing to grow in the hearts of every dog she rescued, every life she touched, and in the love that flowed through her own heart. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth of her dogs beside her, and the love that surrounded her. And with that final breath of peace, she whispered softly, "Thank you, Charlie, for everything." And in that moment, under the fading light of the day, she realized that love, true, pure love, never ends. It lives on always, in the memories we cherish, the hearts we heal, and the lives we touch. As the years went by, the pain of losing Charlie softened into something more manageable, something bearable. The quiet ache was still there, a gentle reminder of the love they had shared, but it no longer consumed her. Instead, it had become part of her story, a part of her that shaped who she was becoming. Max, the dog she had rescued, and Leo, who had already brought so much joy into her life, now filled her home with a new kind of love. Together, they created a family that she never thought she'd have again. Each day with them was a quiet testament to Charlie's legacy, to the deep love that had not only changed Charlie's life, but had changed hers as well. It wasn't the absence of pain that made this love so powerful. It was the presence of peace. With Max and Leo, she learned that love doesn't have to end. It doesn't have to fade. It doesn't have to be lost to time. Love, like Charlie's spirit, transforms. It moves on, it finds new spaces to inhabit, and it continues to give. One evening, as she sat in the quiet of her living room, Leo curled up beside her and Max resting at her feet. She felt a deep sense of contentment. Life was imperfect, messy, and full of change, but in that moment, everything felt exactly as it should. Love had found its way into every corner of her life, in ways she never expected. She closed her eyes, a soft smile crossing her face, and whispered, "Thank you, Charlie." And with that, her heart felt whole again, full of the love that had always been and always would be.